Hi, I'm Bob Moog, and I'm here at Sear Sound Studios in Midtown Manhattan. Walter Sear has been a friend and colleague of mine for many, many years now. We've been working together on theremins and other electronic musical instruments since, the early 60s, long before I developed the synthesizer. I built my first theremin from a magazine article in 1949. I continued to build theremins all through high school and even into college somewhat. And by 1954, I had made my first theremin professionally. I've been building theremins for 50 years now. The Etherwave Pro theremin is the latest design of mine in a long line of theremins. The theremin was originally invented around 1920 by the Russian physicist Leon Theremin. Theremin came to this country in 1927 and immediately became a sensation because of the space-controlled instrument that he designed. He remained in this country through 1938, during which time hundreds of concerts of the theremin were presented all over the country and in fact all over the world. The Etherwave Pro is a radical departure in cabinet shape from all previous theremins. Instead of being in a wide box that supports both antennas, the Etherwave Pro now is in a slender, vertically arranged enclosure with a sculpted arm sticking out on the right-hand side, holding the pitch antenna, and the volume antenna plugging in on the left-hand side if you're right-handed. There will also be left-handed models. I believe that the Etherwave Pro is the finest theremin I've ever designed. I've always been fascinated with the theremin. On the top level, the obvious level, it's a striking musical instrument, completely different than anything else we know. You don't touch it when you play it. That's really sort of magical. At a technical level, the way the theremin detects small motions of the player's hands in space and creates from that a complete range, musical range of pitches is really fascinating. On a musical level, the theremin is the most expressive musical instrument that there is because it responds to every single motion of the player's hands, no matter how small or how quick. Every thereminist has his or her own style of playing, and his or her own personality comes through clearly. Any music you can imagine singing or humming, you can play on the theremin. Some thereminists are great performers of classical music. Others play jazz, they play pop music, and there are even quite a few who are into experimental music now, completely new forms of music. There have been many extremely gifted thereminists in the history of the theremin. Perhaps the greatest thereminist of all was Clara Rockmore, who concertized widely on her instrument that Theremin himself made for her throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Another great thereminist is Lydia Kavanagh, who lives in Moscow and in fact studied under Leon Theremin himself. Recently I met the thereminist Pamelia Kurstin. Like Clara Rockmore and Lydia Kavanagh, Pamelia has a unique gift for the theremin. In fact, Pamelia visited Clara, and Clara listened to her playing and said, "You have the gift." We're fortunate to have Pamelia Kurstin here today to show us more on the Etherwave Pro theremin. Hi.
Hi.
How are you liking the Etherwave Pro?
I love it. After spending a few days with it since you brought it over, I've been having fun with it.
It sounds great when you play it.
It's got great sounds. So many options.
I think this is the first design theremin that we ever made where it's easy for us to make a left-handed one as well as a right-handed one. This one we made left-handed, especially for you.
Thanks. Why is it easier to make this one a lefty than other ones?
The circuitry inside goes up and down, so it can be connected either way. Yeah. And in the older ones, the circuitry goes left to right, and the pitch circuitry is on the right-hand side, and the volume is on the left-handed side. And if you want to switch them around, you have to switch all the circuitry
Everything
around.
on the inside, it has to be switched around.
Yeah. So these top two knobs are the usual pitch and volume adjustments, tuning adjustments. They tune the antennas. Every Theremin has those. These knobs are big and they're wooden for two reasons. The first is that they feel good when they're like that. And the second is that being wood instead of metal that doesn't electrically interfere with your tuning of them. Down below, this section here is very similar to what's in our professional Ethervox Theremin. On the left here is the range switch, and we can jump in octaves. Like that. On the right side here is a 6-position selector switch, and each one has a different timbre, different tone color. Some tone colors are violin-like, some are flute-like. You'll see. And the first one actually is not a fixed tone color, but it turns on these three adjustments, and you can set your own tone color. You can pick the waveform, the brightness, and what we call a filter, how the brightness changes as you go up and down. So I'll show that. That's the waveform, brightness, and filter. So you can either have one of 5 preset tone colors, or you can make up your own. And down here, there's a place to plug in headphones if you want to practice in quiet. There's a place to plug in a tuning meter if you like to use a tuning meter to practice or to...
Yeah, that could be helpful for when you're tuning it up if you always want to use the same note every time you tune it.
Yeah, some people like to have that going during performance, that they like to know what pitch they're going to be on even before they start playing.
Yeah.
And down here are 2 adjustments. They're user adjustments that you set the way you like to have your instrument respond, and then they're always like that. One of them adjusts the spacing of the low notes on the pitch antenna, and the other adjusts the spacing of the quiet part of the volume range. And then, of course, this is the off-on light here.
And there's the standby button, too.
Yeah. So you're able to silence the instrument, turn it on and off very quickly. Down at the bottom, underneath the instrument, is all the wire connections. So the wires come out and go straight down. There's a power cord, and then the audio cord. There are 2 other jacks for control outputs. What that means to somebody who has a synthesizer is that you can use this Etherwave Pro to control analog synthesizers. And that's really a lot of fun. A big area to explore, all sorts of experiments you can do. It
opens up your palette of sounds then.
Yeah, it's open-ended. You can do unlimited things with that. Now, how do you think it compares with your original Etherwave?
Well, it's very similar to it because I feel comfortable with it because already I have the same controls as far as going into the bass and the cello and the violin range with it, but also I like the presets that you put in there, so you can just that's kind of cool. I can easily, oh, I'm going to change my sound, and I don't have to fidget with it really quickly. I'm sure this is going to be so much easier when I go out again on the road, because after spending a few years with the Ethervox and unpacking it and putting in a big case and watching people throw it around and going and all of the scary things that you think about when you're on tour, and you're like, oh, I hope this piece doesn't get lost, because what would I do if I'm missing one leg, or this is so much smaller, compact. You can keep track of all the pieces in just one little bag. You can fit it in, and it's so quick to set up. It's great when doing a show, and they're like, okay, you have 5 minutes to get off the stage, and you don't want to lose anything when you're unpacking, and this seems so much easier for someone who's not that familiar with it to even like put it together for me or unpack it.
Yeah. You have 5 minutes to get off the stage, and it's dark.
Yeah.
You can't see what you're doing.
What was your first theremin like? What did that look like? How big was it?
First theremin I built wasn't even in a cabinet. It was on a metal chassis with 4 vacuum tubes sticking up and 2 little copper tube thingies coming like this, and you played it like. I don't remember being able to play it, but it sure was intriguing, and I began to build different ones. I built one that was in like a little coffin. It was about 3 feet long, and it had all kinds of crazy stuff in it. And the antennas were underneath the top of the coffin, so you'd sit there playing like that. At that time, I didn't know what a theremin was supposed to look like. I don't think I'd ever seen even a picture
You'd
of
only
one.
read about it before?
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you slowly come to design them to
I guess eventually I saw a picture of what it was supposed to look like. The first one I built for somebody else was made in a very nice mahogany cabinet that my father built because he was a cabinet maker. And the panel was made from a silk screen that was hand lettered, but it did have a pitch antenna, and it did have a plate for a volume antenna. And then when I was in college, I built a couple of different models. This is one of them. We call this the Vanguard. And I built that while I was in graduate school studying to be an engineer. And actually I sold quite a few of those through the many years that I was a graduate student. And then when transistors came in, it was possible to make a theremin that was much smaller, and that's where the Etherwave design comes from. And now this is the latest configuration, which is completely different from anything we've done in the past, completely different from what Leon Theremin himself did. I guess when we thought of the Etherbox, we thought of it in terms of a traditional concert where there was one performer on stage and everybody catered to that one performer, and there was lots of light and lots of time. That's the traditional way of performing. But the contemporary way is a lot faster moving and a lot more hectic.
Yeah. But it still looks sleek enough to be beautiful to play on stage. If I do something with a big orchestra, then now you could see my whole dress.
That's important.
Yeah. What I love about just the theremin in general is that it's really honest. You cannot BS on it. It's something that you really it's just like a voice. When you hear someone singing, is someone just going no, and just like pushing it, or is someone? It's almost like they're just having a conversation and telling you a story. Or you can be just as expressive with this because it's so honest to every little movement that you're making.
Yeah.
How would you describe in a like what it is that's happening? Because people ask me all the time, how does this work? And I could tell them, just that it's responding to me, but I can't always say what it is about it or how technically that it works. I can't really say it in an easy way or the hard way.
Well, it's both easy to explain and completely counterintuitive. Because you don't see anything, so you don't understand how sensitive this instrument is. There is a radio electromagnetic field around both antennas, and the fields go out several feet, and anything at all coming into that field, a person, a chair, a wall, or even moisture in the air. If the air changes moisture, that has an effect on the antenna, and that's what the tuning knob is for, to compensate for all that.
A lot of people ask me, what do you feel anything when you're standing there, or do you feel electricity, or you know, and really you I don't know how to describe it. I mean, you'll stand behind it and you see that it's sitting in front of you, but you'll kind of zone out sometimes. You're not really concerned with looking at anything in particular, and you'll you know, what you'll really be paying attention to, you know, is what you're hearing come out of it, because when you listen to what's happening, that will indicate to you whether someone is walking up behind you, even if all of a sudden the spacing in your notes might change, or you might not be staying very still, and you can hear, you know, little waverings in your pitch from that. And you know, what you'd be focusing on a lot is listening to what it's responding to, because there could be something like a camera moving around affecting the pitch changing, and so you know, you're not only with the theremin, what you're saying, you have these knobs to compensate for the changes, but your body also is one of those knobs that's not attached to the theremin that has to compensate for everything, and so you have to imagine your body as a tuner itself, or as a, you know, your body is really what you know, what the instrument is completely responding to, and you almost want to look at your body as the instrument.
I really believe that there is some sort of a connection between you and the instrument. The more you practice it, and you know, the more you concentrate on what you're playing, the stronger this connection becomes.
Yeah, it's almost like this helps to just be a gauge for you to be able to listen back to what's happening in your environment, or what's happening with your body as it moves. It's like you're that invisible knob on the theremin that's always compensating for you know, just a, you know, whatever it has to do to adjust itself in little ways.
Pamelia, you've given lessons, haven't you?
A wide variety of people knock on my door and say, how do you do this? How do you turn it on?
So how do you begin with a person who's just learning?
Well, the first thing is having the person just you know, set it up at the correct height that feels comfortable, because you know, if I'm, you know, this tall, then it might be really hard for me, and you know, it'll be a strain on my arms. And the way I just show them how I have it set up according to how I'm standing. So for me, what's important is having as much of my body compacted together comfortably, so that everything's resting on itself, and see where the theremin sits in front of it, so that I don't have to extend this elbow, or not so often, and this, it leaves less room for error when there aren't so many things moving around on this side of you. And then after that, we get into tuning the theremin, and because a lot of times, you know, people aren't sure, you know, what the volume and pitch knobs are for on it, and
how do you set the volume and pitch knobs then?
For me, what I like to do is I go through the range of it, and I like to have the lowest note be a little lower than that. So with the pitch knob, I'll listen and stay very still, and when you turn it clockwise, it'll make it so that the lowest note on it goes down, which means you'll be increasing your range in the same amount of distance. So that feels comfortable for me now, relatively to how I like my fifths to feel. And usually when you do a simple test like that, every time you turn it on, it'll you'll know that you have it tuned in a way that works for you and that's comfortable, and you're not making too many movements so the rest of your body to compensate for making those tones. But a lot of times, someone might have it tuned so that it's a little bit too far beyond. So what happens is it inverts, and that usually freaks people out because they think that it's broken, and they're like, "Oh no, help me! I don't know. I think I broke my theremin because the lowest note stops too soon." When really all it is just a matter of adjusting the pitch knob so that a low note starts to come up. You can get a closer look at it, say you turned it all far to the right, and get it so.
And sometimes people ask me, why don't you calibrate those tuning knobs? Why don't you have a place where you set it to be in tune?
It's not possible, though, is it?
It's absolutely impossible because every different surrounding and every different person has a different effect on the antenna, and you have to tune that out with tuning adjustments.
Oh yeah, a great example is when I had a student come over. Living in New York, usually your space is so small. You have a bunch of furniture around, and so if you're accustomed to tuning it in the same place, but you take it to a club and you turn it on and you tune it, or if you weren't used to tuning it, all of a sudden having this suddenly huge amount of space around the antennas, sometimes it's like, oh wait a minute, what's going on? It's that could be a good example of what would happen if you don't think about that aspect of it, and you have it tuned correctly, where it's it gets to be about this note or this low next to your body, and when you go to an even bigger space, then that low point will be somewhere further up here, and it's like, uh-oh.
Every once in a while, I find myself on stage with the theremin, and I'm not a good player at all, so everything has to be just right for me. But very often, the people setting up the stage will have put the theremin there before I got there, and they say, "Oh, it's all set up for you," and they're ready to start the show. And where they got it set up is as if I were a cellist, and all the musicians are around me, and they're all going like this.
Yeah, and they're very close by and moving. and also, too, it's something you have to tune for yourself. Because if you were to tune it up, and then I were to get behind it, it would be completely different for me.
Exactly.
Because we're different sizes, and so the amount of mass in your body has an effect, too. And that's why it's also important keeping your body very still when you play, because if you're swaying a little bit, then...
Yeah, that's the first thing you have to learn when you play the theremin.
Yeah.
Stand still.
That's really hard, too, because I'm fidgety, and I like caffeine, and it's a little fight within yourself to don't move, because you'll, when you pay attention to it, you'll hear, you can hear what it sounds like. I'll stay really still, but you can hear me breathing. So sometimes you have to hold your breath. Another thing, besides the pitch adjustment, is the volume adjustment. Sometimes when I'd go in the studio, the engineer would see the volume knob and ask, "Oh, this is how you make the output hotter on this thing." Yeah. But I would have to explain, well, actually, it's so that I can have a control over how much I'll need to move my hands in order to get full volume. And what I really like, how I like to personally set it, is have it, pretty hot so that, just a little movement will bring it on and off. set it, as an example, if I set it so the volume tuning is even hotter, then it's much louder with that same movement. And so that's a good way if you wanted to have like a more of a staccato with the least movement of this hand. And another way sometimes that people see me do is, bringing, because the idea is to just go away from the antenna, so you don't always have to be going this way. You can also, you can go that way, and what's helpful to me is having, the reference point of my thumb to hit against with these two fingers and know that that's full volume. Creative with it, knowing that it's not just the space going up here, but it's a little sphere around it. So some people might find it easier going away from it this way, and also too if I've even tried before, just sitting on a stool. And if you set this really hot, then your foot can go like this and do the articulation really well. Because someone sent me an email once and asked, well, I have, my arm is cut off from right about the elbow. Yeah. And so, is there a way, should I use a foot pedal to control the volume? Yeah. But I thought about it and I thought, well, a foot pedal, you'll have to move your body a lot, to adjust it, and that could affect your pitch. But a really good way is if you have, since this leg is so far from the pitch antenna, if you're actually seated on a stool, you can adjust the volume tuning to where your knee is, and when it's just like bouncing off of the ledge of the stool where your foot sits, then that could be a good way to get articulation, and you're resting on the stool, so you don't have to, your body doesn't have to bounce around, and it, it works just as well. A lot of people also ask about how do you jump from one pitch and land right on the other one? But there are a couple of ways I look at it. First, I think of it as a voice, and as a vocalist, how it feels like to jump an octave, like and you can't explain what it is you're doing inside there, but you know how it should sound. And it's that same concept with the theremin. You have to do it very slowly first, so you become accustomed to jumping to those pitches. And here's an example of maybe like practicing doing a jump. Is it?
Just back and forth.
Too, when you jump blindly, but if you undershoot or overshoot, when you realize that you recognize you're doing that, then you'll know, oh, well, maybe I should adjust something differently when I do the jump to land in that spot. But no matter what, it's you cannot always have control over that. There are times it's inevitable you might accidentally. Also how vocalists sometimes you hear them bend up to the pitch a little or play around with the mistakes you make, because that's part of playing any instrument. Also is when you're performing live, you might accidentally do the wrong thing, but there's a you can try to figure out a way to make it sound nice, and and sometimes people think you did it on purpose.
Now, you use your fingers. Can you say something about?
Yeah, and what's nice if you use your fingers is that Well, a lot of the times I keep my arms rested on my body, so then I don't have to worry about, my elbows wobbling around. And so, when I'm doing a jump, I try to do as much just with the fingers alone as I can, but there are times when I'll have to do a jump. And, there are certain things you can do, like if you think of just something like Mary Had a Little Lamb as an example, because there's small intervals and like. I think of it almost as you have a one-stringed violin, let's say, and so you're not going to be able to jump to another string. So you have to, in some way, it's intuitive when you make that jump up the up the fingerboard.
Yeah.
And but also it's from the memory in your hand of just knowing how it feels to make that jump. And there are times when you listen, to violinists, and there's always going to be room for error. It's inevitable that you will make a jump, and sometimes what you'll need to do is listen to it, at a low volume before you completely bow it, that it jumps to that spot, so you can fix it immediately before you let it out. And and by doing that also, you'll begin to get used to coordinating your volume hand with your pitch hand, because then your volume hand will be your friend, and it'll help you. It'll help you to create the illusion that you're separating the notes, like you're making a difference between each thing, so you don't hear constantly something sliding. Like instead, you can. I think of it as how an optical illusion is, where sometimes the volume will always be up, but when you raise the volume a little bit more for the notes that you hit, it gives the illusion that you have something that's legato. Like, as an example, if you watch this hand especially. Whoops. This is like just moving a little bit, but for some reason it's the volume is going up slightly when it's doing the definite notes you reach with this hand. With
Singers do that. Good singers and string players do the same thing. Yeah, Pam, vibrato is very important for theremin players, as it is for vocalists and for string players. But you have to do it right. You can't do it too much, and you can't overdo it. Can you show a few things about how you use vibrato?
Yeah. Turn this up a little. It's I guess the best way to do it is to imagine if you were to sing it, maybe, and knowing that the way I set my pitch, the distances are really small, so I can't shake too much of my hand to make a nice vibrato. It helps to start with a really small one. You don't have to use it on every single note, and it's nice when there are little variances when you use a straight note. And
you usually don't begin with a vibrato, or you don't use it when you play fast.
Yeah, when I'm playing faster, I think if I'm doing a vibrato, it might not be as easy to give something off as being, whoops. There's so many ways that you could do it. You can begin. you could do it with no vibrato. Well, I naturally tend to want to use a vibrato at the end, but one of the things that's best to do in the beginning is to perhaps not use any vibrato at all, because when you're doing vibrato, you're making a fluctuation in the pitch, and it's almost as if you imagine, like, here's your set pitch, and your vibrato is going to rock back and forth between it, and if it's not completely on where it's supposed to be at, then it might be hard for you to practice training your ears to jumping to the other intervals if it's always in a vibrato kind of state.
Sure.
So when you're practicing using, just a straight tones with no vibrato, then you'll have your hands will begin to develop their muscle memory a little bit better, I think, for jumping to your exact pitches, and then you can. Being used to playing without a vibrato helps you to stay very still and really hear the changes in your pitches when you do make different notes. And then, from the control of staying still, you can slowly add a vibrato and practice using it at different speeds then, and not being too wide. Here's an example of a wide vibrato. It's almost like, kind of like, but it's nice to practice the small distance one.
Pam, this walking bass technique of yours, that's absolutely unique. Nobody, could you show how you do that?
Okay, first, I'm going to set the range so it's, at the lowest range. And maybe I'll adjust the sound a little bit.
Could you do that in slow motion? Is it possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll turn it up a little bit more and...
That's great. Do you think about your technique differently when you're playing classical than when you're playing, say, rock music?
Oh, yeah. There's so many different things I imagine. Sometimes I'll listen to, classical violin high fits, and the high fits also reminds me of the violinist Stefan Grappelli, who played jazz, even though they're both two different genres. There are things they did, that violinists do, like. There are certain notes that they push up a little bit the pitch or drift down. And one of the best things I recommend to people is just listening, to the instrument or the melody even. First, have the melody in your head so you can sing it to yourself in your head.
Yeah, I think one important thing for thereminists who are just beginning to understand is that whatever you hear, you can play if you figure out how to move your hands to get that pitch and volume pattern.
It's good in the beginning. The best thing to do, I feel, is to to, listen to music, put on some records or CDs, and then with a theremin just to, bring up your volume and listen, oh, am I in tune with that? Oh, is it a little sharp or flat? Or, and then the next thing is like, oh, do I want to play what the vocalist is singing? Or maybe should I start with a note, even if it's one single note or a fluctuation between 2 or 3 different notes that are close together that can fit over all of the different things that happen in the song, because you could slowly, build those blocks, I think, in your ears and develop it so that you're hearing, not just the melody, but hearing what's happening all around it and how you can fit in with it. Because eventually developing that, I think, is what will help when you want to establish the memory in your head of, just a sequence of different events, a sequence of a melody that might be very complicated even. You could slowly build to that, I believe, by listening first to, how just using one voice alone, you can make it fit and, hear that it sounds right with what's happening around it.
Now we're in for a real treat. Let's listen to Pamelia Kurstin on Moog Etherwave Pro Theremin and Makoto Ozane on Steinway piano. Thank you, Pamelia. Thank you, Makoto. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you, Walter, for the use of the coolest studio in the Big Apple. I designed the Etherwave Pro Theremin for all kinds of music making and for musicians at all levels of musical accomplishment. We at Moog Music Incorporated now invite you to explore and enjoy the Moog Etherwave Pro Theremin. Thank you.